So today it's New Year, changing out the calendar. So I thought it would be fun to talk about how and why we have our current calendar. I was not anticipating that this would be as big of an adventure as it ended up being. It was a more wild ride than I thought, which might tell you more about the state of my existence than anything else. But it's going to be so fun. So let's go ahead and get started. Um, The reason that we have our current calendar is because of Easter. Why? I'm so glad you asked. We're going to, it's a story. We're going to go through the whole story. So, no one knows exactly when the first calendars were created. Some say it goes all the way back to prehistoric times. Clearly, there were civilizations like the Mayans that had calendars as early as like 3000 BC. But most ancient cultures had calendars that were either based on the solar year or on lunations. So the solar year is the time that it took the sun to get from one point in the sky all the way back around until it was in the exact same spot. I don't know how they measured that, but that's how they measured their year. Other calendars were based on lunation, which is basically the cycle of full moon to new moon and then back to full moon. And that takes approximately 29 days, 12 hours, 44 minutes, and 2.9 seconds, which was a lot more specific than I thought it would be. But there you go. You can dazzle all of your friends with that super helpful knowledge. But when it comes to genealogy, there are two calendars that we kind of need to worry about and focus in on. And those are the Julian calendar and the Gregorian calendar. So, in order to understand those calendars, we have to go all the way back to ancient Rome. They are thought to have created their first calendar in about 753 years before Christ. It was created by Romulus, who was the first king of Rome. Rome was, of course, named after him. And this is kind of what his calendar looked like. There were 10 months. Each month consisted of 30 or 31 days. The first month of the year was Martius, which is named after Mars, who was the Roman god of war and was considered to be an agricultural guardian. Aprilius was, oh gosh, there's so much debate about Aprilius. There's one school that thinks it was named after the Roman god Venus, or the goddess. She was the goddess of love, beauty, prosperity, and victory. But others argue that it was named after the Greek goddess Aphrodite, who was kind of the Greek equivalent of the Roman Venus. I don't know why the Romans would have named their calendar after a Greek goddess, but well, what do I know? I'm a genealogist. So the third month is called Maius, named after Maya, who was the goddess of growth. And that makes sense. It's springtime, things are growing. There's another, again, this school of thought that says it's named after the Greek goddess May, M-A-E, who was the daughter of Atlas and the mother of Hermes. The fourth month was called Junius, named after Juno, the queen of the gods and goddesses. And she is the queen or the goddess of marriage and childbirth. And I thought that was kind of funny because, June is such a big month for weddings. And here it's named after the goddess of marriage. So that's interesting to me. The next 6 months were all just named after numbers. Sept is 7, octo 8 sides, an octagon has 8 sides, a decagon has 10. So that's how they did their months. That is a picture of a very, very, very old ancient Roman calendar. I don't know what all of the different markings mean, but if you were paying attention on the last slide, they had 10 months with 30 or 31 days for an entire year. That only equals out to about 304 days. And as we know, a typical year is 365 days, which leaves you with these extra 61 days that were just kind of hanging out. So many times when I thought about the calendars and how it all worked, my kids were kind of born in this window between December and March. My babies are both January babies, so they were born in this kind of calendar void. And I tried to imagine being a parent and having my child ask me like, "Hey, when's your birthday?" And I'd be like, "Ah, you don't get one." It's just kind of hanging out in the middle of nowhere. But clearly, this is a big problem. 61 days that are not assigned anywhere. So then Numa Pompilius came onto the scene. He was the second king of Rome. He rose to power in about 715 BC, and he decided that he was going to fix some of the more glaring problems with this ancient Roman calendar. So this is what he did. He decided to stick 2 more months on to the end of the year. Januarius was named after Janus, the Roman god of beginnings, change, gateways, archways, and doorway. Who gets to decide who the god of doors is? I kind of want that job. That sounds like fun. But I like it. January, it's new beginnings, and he's the god of beginnings. And Februarius is different. It was not named after any particular number or Roman or Greek god. Instead, it was named after a ritual purification called februm. So there was this kind of idea that during this particular month of the year, that manes or the souls of the dead could permeate the earth during this month, but that these shades or ghosts were placated by commemorative honors and celebrations. And so they had this purification time called februm. And so they decided to name, excuse me, the month of February after that celebration. So now we're getting closer with the addition of Januarius and Februarius. We now have 355 days in a year. So there's only a 10-day difference from a traditional year. And here I just found this. This is kind of a fun little fact that Numa Pompilius wanted every month to have an odd number of days because having an even number of days was considered unlucky. So he went through and all of the days that had, all the months that had 30 days, he changed them to all have 29. But that mathematically is a problem because if you have an even number, if you're adding together an even number of odd numbers, I hope that makes sense, it will equal out to an even number. So 1 plus 3, both odd numbers, equals 4, which is even. So if every single one of these 12 months consisted of an odd number of dates, then the entire year would be unlucky. So Numa Pompilius had to choose 1 month to be an even number of days. And so he chose the month of February. February was going to be the unlucky month when all the spirits are roaming around, and February was going to have 28 days. So now, if anybody ever asks you why February is short and they're wondering why it doesn't have more days than any other month, you could tell them about Rome and our friend Numa, who was scared of ghosties. All right, so because we are still 10 days short of what we think of as a year, the Romans decided that they needed to do something to fix this up. So they decided that they would add an entire leap month, which they called intercalcarius. And the month of intercalcarius had an additional 27 days. So years with an intercalcarian month would have a total of 377 days, as opposed to their traditional 355. But they did not have a set rule on how often they needed to have these leap months. So mathematically speaking, they would need to be held every 2 or 3 years. But sometimes Rome would hold them in back-to-back years. Sometimes they would stretch it out and go 4 or 5. But it wasn't at all consistent. And so things got a little bit strange. And before too long, after a couple hundred years, the Romans ended up celebrating their harvest festival before they had even planted their crops. So, in spite of that, this type of calendar, with the way that Rome set it up and this intercalcareous month, existed for several hundred years with one notable change. In the year 154 BC, Rome had a rebellion. Up until this time, the year started on March the 25th. March 25th was New Year's Day, right after the spring equinox. So it kind of makes sense. The world's kind of coming back to life. We're going to start our new year. Um, but it's kind of weird to have it so far into a month and not have it be the first day of a new month. And so they rebelled and they decided that they wanted January to be the first month of the year, and that January 1st would be New Year's Day. So Rome rolled that out in 153 BC. But other countries, other places were much, much slower to get on board. They stuck with the March 25th date. Denmark, guess who has ancestors from Denmark, guys? They rolled it out between the 13th and the 16th century. They rolled it out very, 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 very slowly. Some years would start on January 1st, and then they decide, oh, just kidding, we like March better. They went back and forth a lot. Other countries, the Roman Empire adopted it, but not until 1544. And we're going to talk a little bit about why in just a minute. But if you look all the way down on the bottom right, Great Britain and the British Empire adopted this change in 1752. So the 13 original colonies here in the United States were at that time still part of the British Empire. So until 1752, the first of the year was March 25th. And that's important. That's really important to know as you are working on your genealogy. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. So that was the one big change with that calendar until Julius Caesar came on the scene. He decided that there were some problems. Celebrating the harvest festival before they planted their crops was bizarre. And so he decided that he was going to make a few changes. So here is what he did. The first thing he did was to eliminate that whole leap month of intercalcareous. He decided that we would have one leap day every 3 years. He also decided that February would have 29 days and 30 during a leap year. And he made months apart from February alternate between 30 and 31. Now, at some point, February went back to 28, and it all goes back to Numa. But these are some of the big important changes that he made. So, and then he did a couple other things here. Again, he moved that. He didn't move it, but he had that as a part of his final product, that January 1st would be the first day of the year. He decided to honor himself by naming the 7th month of the year July and the 8th month of the year after Augustus Caesar. So now we have July and August. Then he made a change. He decided that we were going to have a leap year every 4 years. And at the time that he made these changes, this was considered to be the best solar calendar in the world. So considering how early in history this happened, the math that had to occur for this to all make sense is just mind-boggling to me. This solar calendar was accurate to within 11 minutes per year, and they were able to determine that by the position of the stars. We're going to talk about a little more math. So the Julian calendar only works if there are 365.25 days per year, but there are actually 365.2422 days per year. And that's a difference of 78/10,000th of a day per year. If you're like me, you may have thought, big deal, who cares? That's close enough. But it actually is kind of a big deal because over the span of 400 years, there was a difference of 3 days. That doesn't sound like much in the grand scheme of things, but it was because it was impacted. By now, Christianity was rising in its culture and influence throughout the world. And Easter was, the high holy day within Christendom. And so this difference of 3 days was shifting where Easter fell. And so that was a big deal. Also, mathematically, every 400 years, if you have a leap year every 4 years, there should be 100 leap years in 400-year span. But we only need 97 because of that 365.2422. We only need 97. So things were starting to get a little bit mixed up again until we meet Aloysius Lilius. He was Italian and had quite an impressive resume. A doctor, astronomer, philosopher, chronologist. He spent a lot of time thinking about this particular conundrum and how the year should fall. Unfortunately, Aloysius was a numbers guy, so he made a couple of important discoveries. The first is that we would need to have a leap year every 4 years unless the leap year can also be divided by 100. And if it was divided by 100, then it would not be a leap year unless the year can also be divided by 400. So if it can be divided by 100, it was not a leap year unless it was divisible by both 100 and 400. And this is why the year 2000 was a leap year, because 2000 can be divided by 400. And that just helps to even out that math. So let's see. With these changes, if we implemented those two little things, the difference per year would only be 26 seconds. 26 seconds off. So you would have one extra day every 3,322 years. So, given that Aloysius came on the scene in about 1500 and implemented these changes, that wouldn't be a problem for a very, 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 very long time. But he accounted for that too and decided that every year that is divisible by the number 4,000 would not be a leap year. So even if it's divisible by 400, if it's also divisible by 4,000, it would not be a leap year. I know it's a lot of math very early in the morning, but stick with me. We're getting there. So the only problem with this system of reckoning was that it required a one-time shift. They needed a leap forward to correct this backward shift that had been occurring over hundreds of years. And not surprisingly, no one wanted to be the one to pull the trigger and make the decision to jump forward in time. Until we get to Pope Gregory the 13th. He and Aloysius must have known each other because Pope Gregory the 13th was the Pope in the year 1582. And he decided that he was going to be the one to implement this change and make the jump. So he decided that people should go to bed on the 4th of October in 1582. But when they woke up, it would be the 15th of October in 1582, a shift forward of 10 full days. So this is what that calendar would have looked like. I mean, they didn't, again, as a mom, I thought, what if your birthday was on like October the 8th? You don't get a birthday that year. Mm-hmm. So it's silly, but that's where my head goes. Mm-hmm. This is a calendar or table. It's a table of different countries or empires with two different columns. So the first is when they decided that the 1st of January would be the first day of the year. And the second is when they officially adopted the Gregorian calendar. So Rome didn't adopt the Gregorian calendar because it collapsed in 476 AD. Generally speaking, the Catholic regions who were kind of under the Pope's rule, they towed the line pretty quickly. By 1583, they adopted the 1st of January as the first of the year in 1544. And then as soon as Pope Gregory announced that we needed this shift forward, that's exactly what they did. Other Catholic regions like Italy, France, Poland, Spain, and Portugal all fell in line pretty quickly. Countries like Greece and Russia were Orthodox, and they did not want to make the change because they didn't necessarily accept the Pope's authority. So they were more slow to come to make that jump. Norway and also England, the British colonies, they were Protestant, so they also resisted that change. Um, you can see on the chart that Great Britain and the British Empire, except for Scotland, because Scotland is just their own thing. They adopted January 1st much quicker than the rest of the British Empire. But this also would have included the U.S. colonies that we made that change in 1752. I pulled this directly from the Wikipedia page about the Gregorian calendar, and I had my mind blown a little bit that Saudi Arabia did not make this shift until 2016. I mean, that's just a couple years ago that they made that change. Looking at this, a lot of them seem to make that shift during the First World War and shortly thereafter, which is just kind of fascinating to me. They also, on that same Wikipedia page, they provided this conversion chart. So those countries that adopted the Gregorian calendar up until the end of February in 1700, they had to shift forward 10 days. If we shifted between March 1st, 1700 and the end of February in 1800, which we did in the US, you would have to jump forward 11. And they kept going. There are still countries that do not follow the Gregorian calendars. So they provided this chart too. If they were to fall in line today, they would have to jump forward 13 days. And if they wait almost 100 years, they would have to jump forward 2 full weeks to be in line with everybody else. So I got a little bit curious and I wanted to know some of the other countries that, what do they do if they don't use the same calendar? So these are 4 countries that have completely rejected the Gregorian calendar as it exists today. I found a picture of the Ethiopian calendar. This is current. Uh, it's our 2023 January, and I don't even know how to read this. But it's what their calendar looks like. In Nepal, they have 2 different calendars. The Vikram Samvat is used by the Hindu faith, and they practice their calendar follows a lunisolar calendar. Um, each of their 12 or 13 months. Uh, wow, me with the talking right now. Each year has 12 or 13 months. They aren't necessarily all consistent with each other, but that particular calendar is about 57 years ahead of the Gregorian calendar, except January to April. So right now it's only 56 years ahead of us. They also have the Nepal Sambat, which is the calendar that is used by other residents of Nepal who do not practice the Hindu faith. So their calendar era began using our calendar on the 20th of October, 879, with 1143. So their year 1143 would correspond with our 2022-2023. So they're quite a bit behind where we are. Then both Iraq and Afghanistan use the solar Hijri calendar, which looks like that. Very interesting. The year 1445. I just, it's so interesting to see how different countries do different things, and how many days their months have, and all of these different. It's just interesting. Then there are countries that use a combination. So, to be in line with most of the rest of the world, they follow the Gregorian calendar, but they also have other calendars that they may use. Before prepping for this program, I was aware that Islam and the Israeli, the Hebrew calendar existed. I had no idea about some of the others. I lived in Japan and I had no idea that they had their own calendar system. So I'm going to do some digging and find out more about that. But it's just interesting. I have trouble keeping track of the day of the week as it is. Having to keep track of two different calendars, I think, would just,
That'd be hard.
it'd be hard. All right, I'm going to turn the time over to my colleague Lisa for just a minute.
Right? And what we're going to talk about here is, as it says, old style versus new style, meaning basically we're talking about what happened when the calendar changed over in the UK and its colonies in 1752. There were two changes made. First, the new year was changed from March 25th to January 1st. And then the calendar was switched from Julian to Gregorian calendar. And the new style dates that we're talking about refer to both adjustments. In older documents, the old style date's going to appear with the Julian date. In newer documents, the date is usually shown in the new style. Some dates before 1752 are expressed in double year date form. As an example, 1648/9, which 1648 was then before 1752. Okay. The legal, as I said, the legal beginning of the year before 1752 was March 25th, which is Lady Day. Um, so we'll continue. The first person we're going to talk about is George Washington. When he was born in Virginia, his birthday was February 11th, 1731. That's the Julian date, and that was the previous year, the end of the year, because the year had not switched over yet. But when the British colonies moved to the Gregorian calendar in 1752, his birthday moved up 1 year because it was now after the new year, because the new year was now January 1st. And up 11 days to February 22nd, which is the date that we typically celebrate George Washington's birthday. But he still celebrated both birthdays. And then another person we'll talk about his birthday was Paul Revere. He was born on December 21st, 1734, in the British colonies, I believe, probably in Boston. And when the calendar switched over from the old style to the new style, his birthday became. Let's see if I can get it.
One more.
New Year's Day. Basically, if your birthday fell between the 21st of December and the 24th of March, not only did your date of your birthday move 11 days, but the year actually changed by 1 year forward.
His day, month, and year. all shifted.
Yep, they sure did. The day, the month, and the year all changed. And so our next person would be Sir Isaac Newton. Now, he is a little bit different because both his birth and death dates came before the switch to the Gregorian calendar. And so, his Julian date birthday was December 25th, 1642. But his Gregorian birthday became January 4th, 1643. And his death date in the Julian calendar was March 20th, 1726. But his death date was March 31st, 1727, when it changed to the Gregorian calendar. So the days and years of both the birth and the death and the month all and his birth month changed as well. So these are typically the birthdays that you'd see for Sir Isaac Newton, but when he was born, it wasn't actually the day he thought his birthday was. And our next person would be, of course, Thomas Jefferson. He was born on April 2nd, 1743, in Virginia. And that's his old style birthday, and that's what appears on his tomb. Go back.
You wanted to go back?
Yeah.
There you go.
His new style birthday is actually April 13th, 1743. And here's his tomb with the old style. And as you can see, he died after the calendar change. And the inscription on his tomb was, "Here was buried Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence, of the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom, and father of the University of Virginia, born April 2nd, 1743, old style, died July 4th, 1826.
I like that he kept his old style birthday.
Yeah.
He's just like, I'm not changing.
Yeah, that's my birthday.
That's my birthday.
Yeah. And now our next person.
Oh, there's the OS for old system.
Okay. Would be Charles Cornwallis. And I came up with an interesting situation with him because his birthday came up as December 31st, 1738. But I didn't know whether it was old style or new style. If that's the new style date, then his birthday would have been December 20th, 1738. If it's actually the old style date, then his date of birth would go to January 10th, 1738. I wasn't sure which one it was.
Should that be 1739?
Or it should be 1739, yes.
That's my fault. Sorry, guys.
That's okay. So anyway, I was never able to confirm one way or the other which style it was.
Yeah, we did decide that it was most likely the Gregorian calendar. So at the time that he was born, he would have felt that his birthday was the 20th of December in 1738. But it could go either way. You just never know. History is kooky like that. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about why this is important to understand. This system of double dating. We talk about it a lot within the genealogical community. Raises a few eyebrows with people who are not familiar with genealogy because double dating means, two couples that,
Yeah.
But genealogically speaking, it has a completely different meaning. So I found a couple of examples that I wanted to show you. This is the first. I pulled this from some records from Massachusetts. And that line says Hezekiah, son of Hezekiah Miriam and Prudence his wife, was born on January 15th, 1733/4. So I don't know why they didn't shift the date as well. It should have shifted forward 11 days. Um, I think there was just kind of this mindset that if you wanted to keep the actual day, I was born on the 15th, you can keep the 15th, but you did need to adjust the year. So in this example, the year 1733 would have been the year using the Julian calendar, but if you had switched to the Gregorian calendar, it would be 1734. And again, that was because they changed at the same time from the first of the year being March 25th to the first of the year being January 1st. Here is another example that I found. It says on Easter Tuesday, the 21st day of April, in the year of our Lord, 1772, at 5:30 in the morning, the above Millicent Beale departed this life in the 39th year of her age. She was daughter of Robert and, oh, I cut that off. Sorry, guys. But she was born the 5th day of January, 1733/4. And they went to the trouble of writing old style so that you would know that they were using the Julian calendar to record the 5th, that they didn't skip it forward to be the 16th of January. But by the time that she died in 1772, they had made that shift forward. So they didn't need to alter that at all. Here's another example that I found for these dates that occur between January 1st and March 24th. Anyone that had a birthday would have that double dated year. And again, I think that they didn't change the day, they just changed the year. That'd be a lot to remember, I think. Here's an example of a town record that I found where it illustrates how records would have been kept. If you look along the right-hand side, it gives those dates, starting in 1749 as May 24th, June 18th, August the 2nd, August 27th, September 3rd, November 27th, January 12th, which was still part of 1749. But by April 24th, they had jumped ahead to 1750 because they would have made that change on the 25th of March. Y'all know I love a good cemetery. I love grave markers and the stories that they tell. So I know this is hard to see. It says, "Here lieth buried the body of Elizabeth Waters, the wife of William Waters, deceased February the 10th, 1698/9, in the 36th year of her age." So if you look really closely, I know it's kind of hard to see. You can see the 1698 pretty well, but then that little mark next to it is a 9. And that's displaying that they were recognizing the change between the Julian and the Gregorian calendars. So now I'm going to ask you guys, well, in just a minute, I lied. Sorry. This is why it's important. If you come across these records, they didn't always write the exact date. They might write things like they were born 3 days after New Year's Day in 1689. And we would automatically think 3 years after New Year's Day, that's the 3rd of January. But because they were still using the Julian calendar, it would have meant that their birth was on the 28th of March. So spring baby, not a winter baby. If a couple was married on the 9th of February, 1570, you would need to keep in mind that using today's calendar system, this is not a huge change, but it would be the 20th of February in 1571. So now, if you could unmute yourselves, we're going to practice just a little bit. It's lousy weather today, so we actually don't have anyone here with us in the genealogy room. So I'm going to be depending on you guys to help us out. So, what would the fourth month have been in 1729?
Would it have been June if I'm doing my math right?
Yes, it would have been June in 1729. Very good. How about the fourth
Chart.
month? What was that?
See, I need a chart for that.
The fourth month in 1754, and this is after we changed over to the Gregorian calendar.
April.
Yay! Yes, it would have been April. Okay, this is something I pulled from an actual document that I was working with. What does this mean? The second month, 8th, 1722.
So February 8th, 1722.
Very close. So this would have been before we made that shift. So the first month would have been March, and the second month would have been April.
So it
So
would have been April 8th.
yes, April the 8th, 1722. Very good. One more. I think I only have one more. The 11th month in 1593.
January?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Good job, guys. All right, pop quiz is done. This is my super secret handy dandy trick. This website, stevemorse.org, they will do all of the math for you. So you can enter the date of the record. You can look down at the bottom if you're looking for records that are in France. You can switch that drop down menu to show France, and they will show you when France made that switch from Julian to Gregorian. You can pop the date in up at the top, the date that appears on your record, and it will convert it for you. It's really very handy dandy, very, very helpful. So make a note of that website. There it is. We'll send it out as well. This is another whole entire calendaring system that I decided not to dive into today. It's kind of a lot. But if you hear anyone talking about regnal years, that's when you find a document and it says something like, this couple was united in marriage on the 8th day of the 7th month of the reign of King George II. Wow. So it's a whole thing. You have to figure out when King George started his reign, and then what the 8th month would have been after he started his reign. And it's exhausting, but we'll talk about that not today. All right, that's all we've got. So what questions do you have for us?
I was just thinking about, I know like China, they have their New Year. Do they use like a lunar calendar for when they have their Chinese New Year? I just was curious if you knew at all.
I think they do use the lunar. Come back. This is further back than I thought. Sorry, we're gonna just. I didn't put it on there. Yeah, I think that they use. They have the lunar New Year, so I'm pretty sure that their calendar system is lunar.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. Anybody else?
Oh, I enjoyed that. I think the Gregorian calendar is like the metric system. People aren't sure if it's going to catch on yet.
I think that was a big part of it. You know, they were like, what's wrong with what we're doing now? And at that point in history, a lot of people were illiterate. So they didn't keep track of things like writing down their birthdays and tracking the year the way that we do now. So, I mean, I get it, but it's also, it's a little bit frustrating. And then there was the religious aspect too. There were people who thought, well, it's coming from the Pope and I don't follow the Pope. So we're going to do our own thing.
Where did you find that chart? The first one you showed, I think, the Julian and Gregorian calendars and the names of the months. Because I didn't write that down. That'd be nice to have.
Sure. Yeah, I can print that out for you, Debbie.
Oh, okay.
I just found that online. I was looking up, just doing research on the Gregorian calendar and the Julian calendar. There are Wikipedia pages that will tell you all about it.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, thank you.
oh, of course. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. So I'm going to do a little bit of shameless plugging for just a second before we call it good. We just recently started our own social media page. So if you haven't followed us, and you're on social media, please follow us because those numbers really do help. And we try to put fun things up there. But that's it. That's what I've got for you. Thank you for coming. It's appreciated. It's very, very much appreciated. So have a good one, and we will see you all soon.